Hello everyone, welcome to this evening. Great to be here. We're here to talk this evening about the internet, loneliness, whether it's made us more connected or less. I'm Rachel. I have been extremely online for 30 years and I think I'm okay. I don't think it has ruined me yet. And the work I do is really about understanding how technology changes us and how we change it. And I'm very happy to be joined by three very interesting speakers this evening. What we're going to do is we're going to talk about everyone's work quite informally, and then open up for maybe the last 20 minutes in case anyone's got any questions. So if I could hand first to Adele, if you would like to introduce yourself and tell us a little about your work.
Yeah, sure, thank you. Hi everyone, I'm Adele. I'm a journalist reporting on online harms mostly, and I'm part of the Gen Z generation that grew up on the internet, and I think that's important because it really contextualizes a lot of my work. And for the most part, I had quite an optimistic view of social media and the platforms that I use every day, and have been since I was 10 years old. But in 2022, I lost a loved one to online harms, and that was the catalyst for me to sort of channel all of my journalism into reporting on online harms. And since then, I've also become an online safety campaigner as well. So that's the work I do, and I'm really interested to be in this conversation and sort of come in on the elements of addictive design that fuel online harms, but online harms are a spectrum, and of course it's not always the worst case scenario of someone passing due to what they've seen or been, sort of sucked into online. And actually loneliness is also, I would argue, an online harm that many of us experience today. So yeah, that's me.
Hi everyone, my name's Nicola. I'm the founder of an app called Cliq. We're a social networking and community app, and we're all about connecting people through like-minded interests and in-person events. So we're very much using tech as a tool to get people out from behind the phone, and that's what we're really passionate about. I came up with the idea of Cliq when we moved to London about 3 years ago now, and wanted to meet people very easily. Sat down with all the apps out there and realised that a lot of the apps are super transactional and none of them are authentic and in a community format. So we created Cliq, which bridges the gap. It helps people meet new people, but also it helps communities and community leaders to manage their business. Right.
Hi, I'm Tom. I'm a philosopher and author. I've written a dozen odd books about sort of digital culture, being human in a digital age, but a lot of my work is really about what it means to use and think about technology well. So I do a lot of work with schools, with universities, with businesses, focusing on thinking critically about the systems we create. And I guess rebuilding on what both of you have said, for me the most important starting point is that there are no neutral tools, that the technologies and systems surrounding us have certain affordances. They push us towards certain behaviors, they push us away from others, they shape our world. And I'm really interested in what it means for people to have an informed negotiation with the offerings of the tools around them, to be critically discerning users or critically discerning citizens. And I think amidst the very real perils and pressures and perversities of where we are now, it's important to have a counterbalancing positive vision of what we deserve from technology, of what we owe to one another, and what it might mean for the systems surrounding us to uplift us and support us. So it's great to be here.
And I think maybe rather than beginning by talking about all the terrible things that are happening online, I'd really like to spend a couple of minutes thinking about the work that you're doing to move between online and offline, and how your work is actually making a difference in the real world, as it were. And I know that you have been thinking lots about logging off Adele. Would you like to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So, in the process of writing my book, Logging Off, which came out this summer, I had to regulate my screen time a lot more because otherwise I would have never got the words written. And it, for me, was quite a sort of detangling of this relationship that I have with these tools. And like a core part of that was recognising the sort of validation that I get from posting online and how dependent a lot of the time I am, and I think many of us are, in sharing our work online if we're freelance or if that is a big part of our work that we have to share and update and tailor. I think you can get sucked into just posting a lot more than actually doing the offline work, and that's what I really noticed when writing the book. And since then I've also started with my friend Logging Off Club, and me and India both grew up online, you know, using Instagram from the age of like 11, Facebook 10 years old, and our relationship was really dependent on a lot of these platforms for many years because as well when we were at university we were in different cities, but we did actually grow apart in that time of, you know, communicating through digital interactions, but we weren't really seeing each other or making the effort to do the rest of the friendship stuff. And yeah, since then we've been hosting offline events and phone-free events for people, for anyone who wants to get off their phone. And we just this weekend collaborated with Lush and did an event in their store. And the reason we partnered with Lush is because they came off social media in 2021 after Frances Hogan's whistleblower report about the addictive nature of these platforms, specifically meta platforms. And I think that is an example of a business taking a risk and actually doing the work because their values don't align with this addictive platform that is causing harm to so many people. So yeah, that's a bit about what we've been doing.
And I feel, Nicola, that kind of leads into thinking about, like, how are you taking those very sometimes human algorithmic rules that bring us together online to put people together in the real world?
Yeah, I think at Cliq we deeply believe that you need to use tech as a tool. Like, tech's not going anywhere, phone's not going anywhere, social media use isn't going anywhere. We just need to use it for good. And with Cliq, it's that hybrid model of you meet someone online or you meet a community online. Inside that is like your group chat, so you can really get to know people. I think it's very difficult to shove a lot of people in a room and expect them to all have a common interest. So we're very passionate about how do we help people create niche communities as well, so it's interest focused. And then you dip your toes in the chat a little bit, and then you can go to an in-person event. You feel so much more comfortable to go to that event if you know who's going and you've had conversations online beforehand. So we're like, how do we transfer the online to the offline, and how do we make it such a seamless experience that people can use our app as a tool to push themselves out their comfort zone and meet people. And then we actually get people coming back every single time to Cliq because they've had the best experience, but we've helped them to take that connection offline. And I think, like, if you look back, I grew up with Facebook, and Facebook was the only social media app. Instagram, TikTok, we're just scrolling, we're just consuming media. Facebook was the only one that we actually actively met new people on, so you'd like connect with other schools and things like that, and connect with new people. Now we're just watching influencers, now we're just watching brands, and our social media feeds aren't full of our friends. So we're like, how do we bring that back, but how do we help people to meet people through these platforms as well?
And Tom, I think probably just thinking about age-wise on the panel. I mean, I don't know about you, but I remember live journal back in the day, and like thinking about how things have changed over time. Nicola was just talking about how online experiences tend to be about connecting with brands or very kind of well presented accounts. How do you think we get back to a little bit of grittiness and realism there?
Yeah, I'm old and gritty. Oh my goodness, is that me?
Oh, is that me? Sorry.
Right.
Sorry.
Yeah, me. No, I'm 21. No, I'm not. So I do think there's this, we talk sometimes about parasocial relationships. which are relationships that are not mutual. You have a parasocial relationship with a celebrity or a brand. I feel that I know Taylor Swift. I really do. But the danger of that is that then I come to rely upon the feeling that in a certain way I am also known by Taylor Swift, and I'm really not. And I think, in a way, if we're talking about the grit in a relationship, we're partly talking about risk, we're partly talking about a lack of control, a lack of agency, and we're partly talking about a kind of a slight danger or unpredictability. So when we are in a room with someone else, we're live here, we're live on YouTube, terrifying. Anything could happen, but to some degree there is a contract. I owe something to you, courtesy, respect, a modicum of preparation. In a parasocial relationship, what's owed is entirely in the model of kind of consumption, of the monetization of a relationship. And I think in some ways, if we're trying to get back, you know, the grit, the human element, we're partly talking about moving away from the transactional to something maybe a little bit more radical, open and risky. But of course, what technology does is it allows us to de-risk our lives, potentially, to outsource the potentially painful, because when you're designing a system, you're taking pain points, emotional pain points, and you're reducing them or you're amplifying them for profit. And so I do think that in some ways what we need to do is enter into this kind of, this critical dialogue to be really reflective about what am I not getting here. Because if you don't risk, you don't gain. You're not understood by people online in the way perhaps that you want or need to be understood. I'm here in a jacket looking vaguely smart. I'm a parent. I do the school run. I slouch around my village looking extremely not smart. And I'm very lucky because of school and children and church and community. I have relationships in my life that are with people not like me, people who I disagree with, people who I owe things to that are non-transactional in some ways. So I don't have an easy pat answer, because in some ways it's partly about developing a comfort with discomfort, cultivating certain kinds of risk and stepping back and away from safety and being helped to do so.
I feel like there's lots of ways we can go now, but if I may, if we can take a moment to think a little bit more about the ways that sometimes algorithmic interactions can lead us to places we don't really want to go. And tragically, you know, the way that LLMs are now influencing people online, I don't know if people have are aware there have been a couple of instances where people have been encouraged to take their own lives by LLMs now. It feels like a lot of the issues that you're talking about in your work, Adele, are not being addressed. What are your thoughts on practical ways around that?
I would say there are so many. It's like you can look at it at the individual, you can look at it at the systemic. Like my first thing that I would love to see is a ban on addictive design. And whilst that might not necessarily fix the issue with LLMs, so like ChatGPT, for example.
I don't know. It's fairly addictive, I think.
Yeah, and with social media, the way that it's designed to addict us is why we're seeing so many of these crises unfolding, whether it's, you know, teenage boys being drawn into misogynistic content from such a young age. I have a friend who's got an 8-year-old son, and whilst I was writing the book, she and I had a catch up, and she said, I'm really worried because my son's friend's mum rang me and said, your son's been mentioning Andrew Tate.
Right.
And he's 8 years old, and you know that child is not on social media, but he's on YouTube. So again, these algorithms know that this is a young boy, and he's going to be more likely to engage with content that is misogynistic than maybe a teenage girl who might be more likely to engage with you know, pro-ana content, so pro-anorexia content. And this is the real, like, sinister side, I feel, to so much of the convenience that we've become used to in social media, is that, yes, you know, my TikTok feed knows me really well. It knows what clothes I am interested in. It knows that I'm addicted to charity shopping. Like, it knows all of those things, and it keeps showing me more that is curated to that specific demographic. But at the same time, that's why it's sending teenagers down awful rabbit holes of harm and the harmful content. So I do think we need to give up some of the conveniences that social media has sold to us. And again, like you were saying about discomfort, I totally agree with that, because at Logging Off Club, when we were, you know, sort of remove people from their phones, we are taking the comfort blanket away from them. We're taking that thing that they want to whip out when they're in a room full of strangers, because I'll just rather pretend that I've got an email to reply to than go up to someone and introduce myself. And even here, like, this is totally nerve-wracking and uncomfortable to be talking on a stage, but the benefits are so much more immense than me posting a story and saying, this is what I think, and I've done my bit. So yeah, I think we need to get uncomfortable, and I think people are realizing that and being drawn to those offline communities as well, and I think that's a big reason why.
Tom?
I just wanted, to leap in to do some hard agreeing briefly, Adele, and I think Jonathan Haidt's famously written about our lives online. I don't agree with everything he writes, but I think he's a very perceptive critic. And one heuristic, if you like, one shortcut, which I think, you know, as a parent, that's slightly weasel phrase, because all I know is my kids. The idea of encouraging people to take more risks in the real world and fewer risks online is not a bad one. And I think because it captures the idea that in some ways, quote unquote real risks, stranger danger, being run over by a car, loom very large in the imagination, as if your child is in the living room watching YouTube, they seem safe. But in fact, it may well be that going for a stroll around your neighborhood with friends is far, far safer than watching YouTube unsupervised. And so I think that in some ways a recalibration of the nature of risk is quite important for distinguishing between the risks that we want people to be exposed to that encourage growth, and the risks that we consider we absolutely don't want people to be exposed to before perhaps they're able to integrate them into. And it takes a lot to understand what's going on with this kind of algorithmic amplification, this reinforcement of confirmation bias. It's very, very difficult to get your head around it.
Do you think, and I'll come to Nicola for this, there's a sense in which technology gives us the idea that we have control of things we don't really, you know, and I think as a parent, the illusion that you may have some control over what's happening is actually very often not teaching your kids how to live in the world, you know, maybe not helping them as much as you think. But I'm really interested in particularly thinking about all the experiences that we had with lockdown, you know, where more and more of people's lives became rapidly mediated online. Are you seeing that people need a little bit of help to get into the room and talk to each other?
Yeah, I think so, and that's why we've made it so interest focused. So say you've never been to an event before and you've never been to anything on your own, but you're really interested in books. So you go to a book club, there's that common interest. If you don't know what to speak to someone about, you can speak about the book. Same with run clubs, and we always say the niche the better sometimes, and it has to be very much interest focused and live stage focused. Otherwise, it's not really a community. There has to be something that bonds them together. But yeah, I think like we're so addicted to our phones now. We're constantly scrolling, we're constantly consuming, that we've kind of forgot how to have a real world interaction. And I think COVID was something that really amplified that, because like you said, we were just sat at home with the few people that we knew, and we're watching everyone else through our screens. And then after that, there was a massive like I don't know, social dilemma where people just didn't really know how to interact with each other because we hadn't had that face-to-face interaction for so long. And now I think, I mean, was that 5 years ago now, or 4 years ago now? It's crazy, it's been so long. But still, we're still coming out of that period where people are still skeptical about how do you meet people. I think it was 2023, the biggest Google search term was, how do I meet new people?
Right.
And we see it on TikTok a lot. Like, we do a lot of content on TikTok where it's like, events in London this weekend, that type of thing. And the search term is always, how do I make friends in London? How do I find people? How do I connect with people? And we see these search terms going up and up and up. But I think none of the social networking apps are doing anything to solve it. Like Instagram, Facebook, all of them, they could cut hate tomorrow if they wanted to, but they don't. It fuels the fire. These hate comments, these hate pages actually fuel their engagement. Whereas for us, we're looking at it such a different way where the engagement is all about people going to events, it's getting out, and they're the metrics that we look at for success, is how many tickets have been sold, how many people have gone to an event, how many people have chatted in the chat, but how many people have taken that offline, as opposed to just that algorithmic fix.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting to think about. So I have spent years and years and years making digital products, and one of the things that happens when you're making things is you're constantly looking at how many people are using it, how they're using it, what are they doing. It's very easy, relatively, to be optimizing the path and changing it so that people spend a little longer doing this or a little less time doing that, making it easier and easier. And just thinking about, like, to what extent do you think that feeling of metrics and measuring everything is kind of filtering into people's lives?
Yeah, I think massively. When you look at the other platforms, their metrics is going to be comments, it's going to be likes. We've played around with different types of things within the platform. So we haven't got likes on anything. We've been looking at how we do like the upvote and downvote, things like that, because I think when you look at other platforms, like, we're so obsessed with likes, or used to be obsessed with likes. How many people's liked your photo? How many people's liked your video? And that would stand to people's self-worth. Whereas I think like platforms now that are coming out of the works are looking away from that and thinking how we do things differently. And our algorithm is so different to what a social platform is. I think Instagram now, it just favorites influencers, it favorites brands. Half the time, like, your friend posted something, you never even saw it, because it doesn't prioritize that, it prioritizes people with the most followers. Whereas for us, we're thinking about how do we do algorithms differently? How do we implement features that are so different? Like the newsfeed on Cliq is what events are happening, what are other people going to, newsfeed posts about in-person connection. It's not an app where you come on and you post, oh, this is my new outfit, and anything that's like really glamorized on other social media platforms. We're like, how do we create something that has that in-person connection as an element of it? And every feature we build is, how does this benefit the community, and how does this really help someone to push themselves out of their comfort zone to get offline?
Great, thank you. And just opening it up to everyone, thinking about, like, actually back to what you were talking about, Adele, in terms of keeping the friendships alive over time, and scaling that kind of quality. Do you think that's possible? Do you think the internet can help us to do that, or do you think we're better off in real life?
I think the internet can. I'm not anti-internet, I'm not anti-technology, but I think addictive social media design doesn't do that, because platforms are profiting from, like you mentioned, keeping us on the platform, maximising eyeballs on the screen, keeping us scrolling, rather than sending us to our communities or directing us to like-minded people, or even allowing space for us to have debate on these platforms. You know, you never see that sort of middle ground conversation on platforms like X or you know, Instagram. It's very polarized, and I think that's why so much of that intimacy is lost online, because there is no bridging the gaps in our understanding. There is no meeting someone where they're at and, you know, bringing them on that journey of learning to where your views might be. It's very much, this is my profile, this is my curated sort of self and my opinions and what I stand for, and it's not up for debate. And that's not to say that your values need to be constantly interrogated and debated, but I think that's why now we are seeing that politically we are so polarised, because there's no space for that sort of middle ground conversation in the place where we spend the majority of our civic life. Like that is on platforms. It isn't, you know, in our communities. So I think that's where it's sort of taken away a lot.
Tom, I'm going to add a curveball here, which is, what do you think AI is doing to that connection?
Yeah.
Is that helping or hindering?
Yeah, and I think it's very difficult to be monolithic about AI because there are many different systems and ways of using it. But I think to start with the idea of polarization, that seems really important to me. This idea that the public square is to some degree a radically intolerant and divisive place. If we think about friendship and relationships, I think there's ideas in there of trust, of forgiveness, of tolerance, of tolerating or embracing the fact that your friends are people. They may change their minds, they may say stupid things, you may disagree, but you owe something to each other above and beyond that. And citizenship is also partly about that, these contracts. We share a country, we share certain things, and thus we share tolerance of certain differences. And when everything is a weapon to be used in a battle of rhetoric, or is a rallying cry to the crowd, or is an echo chamber, people can become deeply intolerant. So when it comes to AI, what are we talking about? We're talking about Gen AI, we're talking about large language models, we're talking about inhuman agents that want to please you and that want to keep you using them and giving them data. Obscenely useful, very powerful, but they also are obsequious by design. In one sense, at least, they're the opposite of a real friend. You might say the definition of a real friend is someone who knows what you're like at your worst and still meets you for a cup of tea. They contradict you. They gently tell you when you've gone too far. They don't collude in your worst tendencies and intolerances. Or if they do, maybe they're not a real friend. And so in some ways, I think AI can be, in so many ways, an extraordinary force for good, for access, for other things we could talk about. But I think when it comes to friendship and relationships, we hit on this deep problem that it can be an obsequious amplifier of these tendencies towards self-indulgence, confirmation bias, intolerance, tribalism, treating other people as things to be used, rather than the painful, difficult, tolerant reciprocities of friendship and citizenship. So I do worry a lot for those things, because these tools are all too easy to exploit by people who want to sow division and gain power.
So it feels to me like what we're talking a little bit about is one of the things that platforms tend to do is make our relationships more transactional and less relational, and so they're more tidy, more shiny. They're less difficult, messy, and awkward. And I'm just thinking about if you say were in a position where, I don't know, we were going to take over Meta and make it all better, is there anything you would do? Does anyone have a magic fix other than closing it down?
One, I guess, classic observation for me is that partly who are the people calling the shots and making the decisions? When it comes to harms, injustices, biases, and exclusions, the plea is often we couldn't have known in advance, they were invisible. But in general, they're only invisible to someone else on the receiving end, part of a community at the sharp end of a particular form of discrimination, is all too aware of that. And I think to be idealistic about it, which is maybe a ridiculous thing, inviting a lot of different perspectives into these rooms and taking a real deep, if you like, sociological interest in the impacts in people's lives is one way of trying to be kind of literate in these concerns, because otherwise what we often see, I think, is a kind of a narrative that is self-justifying myth-making rather than facing up to painful realities.
I think a big one is
No,
safety.
Yeah.
So safety on a lot of these platforms aren't very high, and I speak to a lot of communities, female-only communities, maybe religious communities that have WhatsApp groups or they have Facebook groups, and ultimately anyone can get in those platforms. With WhatsApp, you don't even need a profile picture or a name, and they're having to vet these people. They let them in. Someone could come in and say something really harmful, one, that's awful for the community to experience, but two, that community will never trust that again. So with Cliq, we're very strict on safety, profile pictures, real names, verification. But also, if I was to go and create an all-female run club, I can say this is only seen by women of this certain age. If you were to download the app, you wouldn't be able to find my community. Even if someone sent you the link, it'll be completely greyed out. So we're really trying to focus on how do we make these platforms safer, because I do believe that Facebook and Instagram, I think you go on Facebook and you create multiple accounts. There's so many spam accounts, so many fake accounts. No one's doing anything to solve that. And when you were talking about AI, it made me think of something we saw earlier. So in America, I don't know who's founded it, there's a company that's come out called Friend, and it's a wearable device.
I saw that.
Did you see it? It's awful. You wear it around your neck, and it's basically an AI friend. So it listens to you, you can talk to it, it sends you notifications through to your phone. But the founder of the company, I think they raised 2.5 million, they spent 1.5 million on the domain to get friends, and then they spent $1 million on Subway ads.
Right, yeah.
And it's just like, I looked at it and we were watching it earlier and I was like, is this a Black Mirror episode that I'm watching it, like the advertisement to it? Because it seems so crazy. And it made me think, like, how much further can this go? How are the people out there building companies like that, and where do they think it can go?
And I suppose the thing that's interesting there is there are people making a lot of money
Yes.
out of this. You know, so if 2.5 million has been invested in it, that's because someone believes they will make back 10 times that. And I think there's something about how do we live a little bit more of our lives out of the market? You know, not everything needs to be marketised or subject to a profit margin. Adele, do you have a magic wand? Is there anything you would do to Meta? Yeah.
Take it down.
I would be arrested if I said what I would do to Meta. Yeah, it's really infuriating, isn't it? Like, as someone with lived experience of losing someone to online harms and being in Bereaved Families for Online Safety, which is a grassroots group, alongside Ian Russell, who lost Molly Russell, his daughter, to the harms that Meta pushes on its platforms, essentially, and Pinterest as well. I think you're right to say that they used to say, well, we could have never foreseen this horrible thing happening, but so many people have lost their lives and experienced such a broad spectrum of online harm that lie and, thing that they've been peddling, it doesn't sell anymore. And I think we've also seen that they're not even trying to sell us that idea anymore, because after Trump came in, Meta scrapped fact-checking. And it's, seeing these companies change their policies overnight, essentially, to align with a far-right, dictator, I would say, and they can't listen to people with lived experience, or they won't, because it's not in their pocket's interest. And I think this is where we have a real challenge, because there is this huge market of big tech companies who dominate the whole market, and they have a real monopoly. And because so many of us are so dependent on these tools, we're not all able to say, tomorrow let's all agree and just log off Instagram or log off Facebook. But I think we need to be advocating for a breaking up of the big tech monopoly. And I know that in the EU there are a lot more ambitious movements to do that. but also write to your MP and say that you're worried and that you care and that you are really not happy with the way that social media platforms are predating on young people and our emotional lives, because I think we need to be lobbying our MPs because big tech's lobbying them. So if we're not lobbying them, they're going to get swayed the other way.
Which, so I will start looking at some of the questions that are coming in, and so if anybody in the room has a question, start thinking about this now. And I would ask, make it a question, not a comment, if that's okay. So I will be watching out for that. But to go, if you do these and then come to the room. But I have one here, which I think is really interesting. Thinking about that lobby from big tech, as people who are trying to do something different, how do you manage burnout? The question here was about lots of people who are campaigning, having a really hard time keeping it together. So when we have multi-billion-dollar companies who are lobbying government, and you have a startup, how do we keep it moving in the face of that? Anyone got any positive thoughts?
I watch Married at First Sight. That's my only offering.
Yeah.
I think it's being mindful. I think it's really being mindful of how much time you're spending online, also what you consume. I'm very passionate about you are who you surround yourself with, but you're also the content that you consume and how much of an impact that can make, just as much as the people around you can make. So I think it's just about being mindful, screen time, trying to lower it as much as possible. But yeah, like you said, doing things to switch off, like Married at First Sight.
Great. Now we've got some questions in the room. I think there are 2 mics. Does someone have a mic? Great. If we could begin with the lady here with the red scarf, and then we had a gentleman over here who was next, and then I'm going to try and... Okay, we've got one there. I'll do it around in a moment. So.
Thank you. This is great so far. Thank you. My question is, are we hopeful about the future? So I'm an eternal optimist. I'm feeling quite depressed right now. So any thoughts around that? One thing, just around this pendant. When I first heard about that, I was like, oh, that's great. We'll be off our phones somehow. We won't be dragged into this screen here that I also think, is detracting from our relationship. So yeah, I'd love to hear about what you think.
Yeah, I'm definitely positive. I think I'm more of a positive person than a negative. I think we've just got to do things like what we're doing to make a change and make it better. I think there's no point in getting sucked into all the negativeness all of the time, because then you're never going to want to use anything and you're never going to want to step outside. So I think the more that we can be positive about the platforms we're using it, and also using our platforms to inspire people, like putting out content that does inspire other people, as opposed to putting out any harmful content or any negative content. Like, we are the consumers, but we're also the people that are putting things on the platform for people to consume. So the more that we can be positive in our approach, I think is important.
I was just going to do some nodding again. I do think that there's a difference between blind optimism and sort of having a vision of what is worth fighting for and designing towards. And in some ways I have the kind of the luck really of getting to do a lot of work around education. And again and again, I find if I go into schools, I've written a book for primary schools, the most terrifying audience I ever face is teenagers who think I'm very old and boring. But again and again, I work around critical thinking in particular, thinking skills. And I find that if I talk to a room full of teens or preteens about TikTok, about Instagram, about social media, and ask people to think about what they want, what they trust, what they don't trust, how they apply judgment to these things, the reactions I get are incredible. That people are thoughtful, people are far more sophisticated than me. People have a very strongly developed sense often of what they owe to one another. And so I in a sense, I kind of refuse to believe the worst of people. And one of the most frightening lessons of technology, perhaps, is that to be human is to be quite malleable to some degree. We're the product of the systems and incentives surrounding us. If you surround people with perverse incentives and hatred, that's often what you get. If you surround people with systems that lift up their thinking and relating and curiosity and so on, then you get potentially a very different kind of behaviour from that.
Adele, do you want to come in, or we can move to the next one?
Just two things, I think. I feel hopeful that there was a poll recently, and I'm awful at remembering statistics, but the majority of Gen Z people would not give their child a smartphone. And Gen Alpha are already regulating their own screen time. And that's kind of like, oh my God, the fact that they have to be thinking about that and doing that already, but that does make me feel hopeful that the tide is turning and that people are really crying out for that return to the offline and the in-person interactions and community.
So I'll pick up another question from online and then take a couple in the room. So if people in the room can pop their hands up while I'm asking this one here. So we've got a question here which is about, at a time when we've got lots of polarisation, is it a problem to be too niche? You know, so at that moment when I think Tom was talking earlier about how people are pushed into extremes, how can we resolve the niche and the community together? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I don't necessarily think it's the niche that is the harmful thing. I think it's the black and white thinking and the like, well, if they are of that group or that view, then I would never have anything to do with them. And I think I've been guilty of that in the past, like especially around when I was using Twitter a lot more.
Right, yeah.
I don't think that's a coincidence. And during election times is when I feel like a lot more just like angry and like not wanting to understand and have those conversations with people, and not being open and receptive to other people's perspectives, and that does all of us a disservice. So yeah, I don't think it's being niche is necessarily bad. I think it's that black and white thinking.
And so it's as well about being more tolerant, more curious.
Yeah, curious.
Yeah. So loads of hands up. Right, I'm going to be very strict on diversity. We've got a woman over here. Can we begin over there? Oh yes. Sorry, you were waiting. I'm so sorry. And then we'll go over there. Yeah.
Hello. Thank you so much for a very interesting conversation. My question is this just a problem of the youth and for teenagers as they're going through that period, or are you seeing that this is actually a problem for older people my generation who are not digital natives? And if so, how are you seeing sort of ways of helping different generations?
I think it's an issue for everyone in some way. I think when you would think back a few years ago and you think of loneliness, you would think of the elderly automatically. But now I think the most lonely is 18 to 24s, I think, are the most lonely generation. And we see it through all ages and all genders with Cliq, that everyone wants to meet someone new, or everyone has like suffered with loneliness at some point in their life. But it's the way that you talk to these different audiences that need to be better. Obviously, the younger generation are more susceptible to the phone, they use it a lot easier. So they know how to use it in a way as a tool because they're so conscious that they're spending so much time on their phone, they want to get off. But they know how to use apps and things like that. Whereas you think of the older generation, that is something that we would love to cater for on Cliq. Our target audience at the moment is 18 to 35 of our core. We do have some groups for like over 60s and things like that, which is really exciting. And it's something that we'd love to go into. It's just the way we'd market to them and the way the app would probably be different for those generations. So like it's an issue that everyone's facing, but it's all about how do you speak to these different people to help them make change.
I don't know if anybody saw there was a long read in The Guardian yesterday about how Facebook extreme right groups tend to be run and managed by people over 65. And there's very much tendency for people to hear an opinion that slightly resonates with them. You get a little bit of social capital off the back of it. And maybe, we do know that particularly people over 70 can spend a huge amount of time at home alone watching their television. If you look at the Ofcom numbers, I think people over 75 on average watch 8 or 9 hours of broadcast television a day. And I think a lot of that is just having it on in the background. And so I think it's a very different sort of loneliness. And that actually it's very easy to think of the internet as a young person's problem. But, maybe if we all thought about what we were doing online, we might not be thrilled if we faced up to it. Could we go over there? Yes, this lady here, and then the lady in, could we do two together? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm a psychologist. I've been working with tech founders and designing tech products since about 2013. So a lot of these issues are really obvious to myself and to other clinicians, and have been, right? But we don't really see a lot of avenues to be able to affect change or to help. And so I'm just wondering what sort of avenues we can help via. I mean, are there certain governments that are more open? Because obviously there will have to be a regulatory aspect. And then also perhaps schools. You mentioned I could see an adolescent age range that could be, potentially open to this. But where can we help? Where can we direct our attention?
And if you could just, oh yeah, great.
Yeah, so I'm really curious about AI chatbots in this, and what the panel see as perhaps the opportunities and the risks. For example, I have a friend who is immunocompromised, and getting out offline in person isn't accessible to them, and they're in a relationship with an AI chatbot who gives them a lot of social nourishment that they don't get elsewhere. So yeah, I'm curious about thoughts on the rise of AI chatbots.
So we've got two very different things. Pick up whichever you would like to begin with.
I'll have a little go. I think to take that in reverse order, I think there is an extraordinary power in being able to interface with technology through natural language. And we shouldn't overlook the fact that this power can really democratize, in a genuine sense, access to knowledge. You can, quote unquote, vibe code by talking to it. You can, in principle at least, have a conversation that is meaningful to you, that is of therapeutic benefit, that helps you. I think one of the really crucial ethical elements is ensuring that you're not being deceived, manipulated, and exploited via that interaction. The late philosopher Daniel Dennett was one of several advocates for what are sometimes called Turing flags. You should always know that you're interacting with an AI or a human. The AI should not anthropomorphize itself. It should not pretend to be a human. It should wear its artificiality on its sleeve. I think non-anthropomorphic interactions where we're tapping into kind of fictionality, different roles, can be very important. I think when it comes to, it's a very different question about who's doing it well in a way. Where do we look? I suppose there's a game when you can name a Nordic country and say that, the Danes are very good at this kind of thing. There's not a lot of far-right politics in Denmark, maybe because it's small and homogenous, but maybe because they have some quite good social policies that tend to avoid polarization. And I think to some degree, we look solely at technology for solutions to technical problems at our peril. It's very hard sometimes for people to come together in shared spaces in societies. And I think if we're just looking in tech for solutions to loneliness, we're in trouble. With that said, just back from a brief trip to India, I've sort of co-founded what I would grandly call a research consortium recently, looking at trying to use AI as a kind of educational technology in universities, trying to use AI to prompt you to think more deeply, to take an evidence base around critical thinking, but also to use it to support group discussions, social interactions, and other learning, because staff are very, very busy, because a lot of people are not given almost any time by the universities, a lot of people miss out. In India, talking to technologists there, fairly obviously, it's a country that has problems and opportunities far beyond my comprehension. But I was incredibly struck by a country where thousands of languages are spoken, and many, many people in remote areas are not literate, but have mobile phones. Having a device that can talk to you fluently in any language on your phone, charged up by solar power in your village, that can bring you education and medical advice and weather forecasts if you're farming, is potentially enormously emancipatory. And so I think amidst all this then, I often find hope by talking about technology in the context of a society, in the context of its politics, its values, its expectations, and not pretending that we solve the problems of tech from within tech by some grand unified solution. I think it begins and ends with communities and the people that are involved in regulating and governing and designing and ensuring that technology serves well understood human needs.
And so, Adele, Nicola, do you have any thoughts on who's doing it well, which governments we could look to?
Australia are doing it well, I would say. They did, the smartphone ban that they introduced in schools was one aspect of it, but they are at the moment, I think the e-safety commissioner is considering work around addictive design and banning that and sort of legislating for that. And that, again, I do think often the smartphone ban can be, whilst I don't think it's the fix-all, it can be the step to further action. So maybe that's the way we need to move. But also smartphone-free childhood, healthcare professionals for safer screens are doing great work. FlipGen's another organisation. So there are people doing good work. You just have to dig to find them. So yeah.
I think you mentioned lots of great ones.
I think we can take one more round of questions. So, person over there with your hand up in the stripy sleeve, and then one from the front.
Thank you for your comments so far. If we sort of understand that there's been an issue with the dating industry and dating apps, and we haven't really learned from the mistakes there, and we're now thinking about doing the same for building communities, why are we not talking more about investing in grassroots programs and rebuilding real communities, like football for children, for example? And most of the things we've been talking about have all been around digital communication.
And then, do you want to go?
Maybe a similar question, actually. The youth voice census that comes out every year came out last week, and it shows a big deterioration in people getting active in extracurricular activities, including sports clubs. So what's the mechanism for turning the tide on that? And perhaps just because that's a similar question, what's the role of employers in this, in terms of trying to create social spaces? So kind of two questions, a bit cheeky, I know.
Great, okay, let's go this way down the line. Adele, do you want to start?
I mean, I think fighting austerity is a huge part of the thing that we need to be doing collectively. And I think a lot of the dilemmas that we've got in the digital space have come off the back of that. Tech problems have also been able to sell themselves as the solution, the silver bullet to government's problems. And I believe that we definitely do need more investment in community funding in councils, and at the moment that's a big task, and hopefully a certain political party won't get in next election, but yeah.
Yeah, I think on the grassroots side of things, that's something we really like to champion within Cliq, because I think a lot of people see communities and they see these huge communities, but they forget about the grassroots communities. But the communities do need tech to suffice. So you think about football teams, they need platforms where they can book things, they can figure out who's playing, all of that kind of stuff. But it needs to be on an app that is supporting those communities. And we're also really passionate about in the future, like how do we have Cliq grants? So how do we give grants out to communities in local areas? How do we work with governments? How do we work with legislations to help bring the money back? Because also it's really difficult for communities to monetize, and communities need to sustain through monetization. So we're also working with brands that can support communities, they can sponsor them, they can do in-person activations, whatever it is. How do we help these communities to get funded so they can grow sustainably? But yeah, I do totally agree that people see community as this big glamorous community. There's so many communities out there that need the support and they don't get the help. So that's something we're also passionate about doing.
So I remember when government digital services were launching in the UK in a younger and more optimistic age, the design principles began with the simple statement, begin with needs. First of all, you just describe people's needs, not the features of your technology and not the fantasy of an optimized community. And I think there's a great place for civic technology that begins with needs. In health and elsewhere, we absolutely see the fact that people will take the profitable bits of the system and make apps and devices and so on, because that's where the money is to be made. But in terms of civic license, Rachel, I think you know a lot more about this than I do. The people who have the most contact with the state often have the most needs and the least money. And so I think a kind of joined up civic vision for, I think really what you were saying, that technology is a facilitator, a bridge towards things that we know are good or beneficial or speak to a need, but it's not the magical isolated solution. We're brains in bodies, we're embodied beings. If you want to help children, get them a good breakfast, get them some love, get them decent quality food and exercise, clean air. These simple things are horribly expensive and hard to give many people. It's much easier to give them an app. But I don't think that technology has to be the enemy of all of this, but you begin with the needs, and your vision does, I suppose, need to be ambitious enough to acknowledge the scale of the problems. It is very easy, it's far easier to say I'm going to save money and launch an app than it is to say I'm going to start investing for the next 15 years in a crumbling infrastructure to try and give people a better civic environment. But I say we, who is this we? Maybe not enough people, but you can't pretend that technology is separate from life and people. It's not data, it's lives, it's deeds, it's needs.
And I will just take that opportunity to say, actually, you know, what I think we need is a sort of renaissance of volunteering and organising and getting out there and doing things. You know, so if you start that relationship on your Facebook group, you know, and you say to people in your neighbourhood who wants to do this, the easiest thing in the world is to get out there, right? But I think it's been made really difficult, you know, and it's amazing to see everyone here. A thank you to everyone online and in the room for coming, you know, and I hope you can maybe stay afterwards to have a couple of moments of genuine connection, maybe talk to someone in the room you don't know, and see if something interesting comes out of that. Just need to check if there's anything important I need to say in my notes, but I think that's okay. Thank you, everyone. Firstly, thank you to our panellists. If you could give them a round of applause. Great. We're done. Great. Thanks a lot, everybody. No, I was about to, and then I thought, actually, I don't know.